I'd like to begin our fireside chat today with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the Jupp people and pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise their ongoing connection to this place and their ongoing contribution to the work that we do and the places that we live. Welcome to Bonnie and to Carolyn. Thank you for joining us today and coming to talk a little bit about your experience with the Desertification COP. And I'd just like to start today by asking you to introduce yourselves. Carolyn, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. So I'm Carolyn Hall. I'm CEO Managing Director of the Mulloon Institute. We're a non-for-profit organisation all about research, education and advocacy around repairing and rehydrating landscapes.
I'm Bonnie Jupp and I'm the Program Manager at RegenWA and also work in the Sustainable Agriculture team at Perth NRM. RegenWA is a for-purpose organisation that empowers farmers to adopt regenerative practices. So a lot of farmer-to-farmer learning and knowledge workshops and bringing together the latest information that's relevant to WA to help increase that adoption and build resilience in our farming systems for future. Grew up on a farm in Northampton in the Midwest. Having that connection to farming and the land from a young age sparked my interest. It also made me aware of the challenges, seeing it firsthand growing up on a farm and being in a rural community. Then pursued studies in environmental science and agriculture, which interestingly, my previous roles have been more in the broadacre grains industry, and then it's like turned the corner and led to this role in the natural resource management space, which really complements the environmental science and ecology side of things that I was interested in, as well as agriculture, and seeing how they can really complement each other with building landscape resilience and still be able to support productive food systems in our state. So really love working in this space and think it's really exciting time to be involved, especially in this space. So
that's really good. And I think it's really lucky when people end up in a role that they love and really enjoy the work that you do, and then it's more about the experiences and the meeting people rather than having to go through just the process of working. Carolyn, what about you? What brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, so probably a little bit of a more long and winding road than Bonnie. Similarly, I grew up on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, so in a small country town called Taree. My heritage is in farming, so my mother and my grandparents were on a farm out in Narrabri under the shadow of Mount Caputar, and I think that always had an influence on us as children. We were very aware of that farming heritage, but the place that we grew up was beautiful and a really wild environment. So we spent a lot of time in that. We went into the state forest to collect firewood. We went to the beach on the weekend. It was a really, you were sort of immersed in nature, and I think that had a big influence on when I chose to go to Sydney and study. I did a Bachelor of Science, and that was all around environmental science. I practiced as an ecologist for years. Then I went back and did a Master's in Sustainable Development, and I lectured in the Graduate School of Environment at Macquarie Uni. So I started to really understand that human element and how important it was not just to be understanding the environment or understanding ecology, but how big a part people played in that. I went back to ecology, and then at a point along that journey, a little bit of despair in there. I'd sort of worked for 20 years in the environmental, natural resource management space, and also in the development space, so working as a practicing ecologist, looking at development applications. And offsetting had come in, things weren't good. We were leading the world in small mammal extinction. It was pretty grim, to be honest. And then in late 2017, I was introduced to the work of the Mulloon Institute, and I met Tony Coote. And I saw the catchment scale project, and it was like, wow, I'd been doing a lot of work with flood engineers and how do you balance biodiversity and flood mitigation. So I immediately understood the work from a technical perspective, and really I felt hope. And so that sense of feeling hope was, I think, been a driving factor in wanting to progress at Mulloon. And then I've been really privileged to go from being the general manager of Mulloon Consulting to the CEO, and now being part of the board as well. So I feel similarly pretty privileged. The work that we do is very values aligned, and growing the team and expanding Mulloon and getting demonstration sites across the country. Yeah, it's really it's great.
Yeah, I think that both of you it's really nice to see you're both excited by the work that you do. And I think this idea of hope is really important, because if we're not hopeful, then it is hard to advocate for change and to encourage the broader community to come along with us. So
for us, we were privileged to be the Australian case study for a UNCCD, the shorthand of the Convention to Combat Desertification. The UNCCD commissioned a report that was prepared by the Economics of Land Degradation, so ELD, which is sort of a subgroup of a really big German group called GIZ, and we were sort of completely oblivious to the significance of the GIZ group and ELD at the time, but for us it was around providing input to the costs and benefits of our work at the catchment scale, but also at the national level. So there was quite a bit of scrambling to get the case study, and of course anything at that level, you're taking a lot of information and putting it into something very short. So there was a process involved in that, and a colleague, Chris Inskeep, and I were involved in that. And then that report was being presented at COP16. And so the opportunity to go along and be part of that presentation team was exciting and daunting and all those things. And of course the scramble to get funding to support us to go, and so approaching the Australian government. But those doors weren't open to us at that time. We weren't part of the right committees or organisations. We hadn't partnered with that might have enabled us to do that. So we were supported by philanthropic funding, which was just wonderful. And then, you're really a little bit trepidatious because you don't have a sense of what it's going to be like, and you don't really have a sense of your audience. So when you're asked to create a 5-minute presentation to talk about your work without a sense of what your audience is, that's a little bit challenging. But from the moment we hit the ground there, it's such a collegiate feeling. Everybody is so supportive and they want to hear your story. So that, I think, really works to put you at ease. That would, very much.
It also stems from the relationships and work that RegenWA and Stuart McAlpine has, been able to develop with his, hard work and involvement over the years as well, in just being such an active farmer. That's, he's built connections through. Similarly, we were also supported by philanthropic funding to go along. So Stuart built relationships with Regen 10 and the Meridian Institute. He was actually invited to go to COP28, which the climate COP the year before, that enabled the opportunity to arise again this year for one of us to be able to go to the UNCCD. Well, I actually didn't have much time to think about it, to be honest. So I gathered some notes, and I think it also helps, having done a lot of the on-ground work that I was going to be talking about. When I got there, the group that I was in, called the Frontline Leaders, they were all either farmers representing farmer groups or Indigenous peoples. So really quite a grounded group of people. So I didn't feel out of my depth meeting them. We were all on the same page with things, and that, it's not just very high level organisations and representatives there. So that created that sense of ease. And then similarly, I think the whole atmosphere there was very much like everyone was there with that momentum and that purpose to really talk through some solutions and get some work done. And then running into Carolyn there was also amazing, because I think with Mulloon and RegenWA, our values align so much. So it was really amazing to see that we were both being invited there to go on and share insights and bring learners back as well. It is such a whirlwind opportunity, and I think just, not anything that I ever thought I'd get the opportunity to do, but it's such an honour to be able to be invited to something of that scale and share insights from a WA perspective or an Australian perspective. But then to bring learnings back, I just think I had this sense of gosh, I need to fill my notepad and really make the most of this opportunity.
We went from some really high-level planning documents and planning reports that had come out that feels very remote from the sort of work that Bonnie and I used to be in touch with on the ground. And initially, particularly in that first week for us, it sort of was like, oh, wow, yeah. But the desire for them to hear stories about what's really happening, that was very clear. This desire to understand what was working and what could work, and how we could share those stories and how that could be adapted and applied elsewhere. That came through really. That was very strong. A bit of a moment for Australia, really.
Yeah,
that's great.
Well, I guess the Riyadh Action Agenda was a big moment of it. That's quite interesting. I wonder if you could talk to that and how you see that being applied in an Australian context.
They were developing a framework for collective impact to restore 1.5 billion hectares of land by 2030.
The exciting thing around the Riyadh Action Agenda was that it was an opportunity for civil society, if you like, so those of us outside the government, the nation-state negotiation teams, to feed information back into the formal negotiations that go alongside the COP. So there was that sort of dual purpose of that action agenda. It's how do we do it? What do we need to do? How do we enable that? What levers are there to pull? How do we pull them? What capacity needs to be built? But also for that information to feed back into the teams that are actually negotiating the text around the agreements, so that they understand, they do a really important job, but they can't be on the ground understanding what's going to work and what's not necessarily going to work. So to have that opportunity to feed in, I think was really, it was great. You felt sort of part of the COP negotiations then. Yeah. It was a fairly sort of structured interaction where they had groups that were facilitated, so there were sort of questions that you answered. But within that, you're really able to share the perspective of Mulloon and the Australian perspective around repairing our landscapes, because we kind of a lot of the international language is around the Convention to Combat Desertification rather than the decade of landscape restoration. So that kind of flipping of the language, if you like, but really important for the other international participants to hear our stories, because we have some different circumstances here. Our farmers are not as supported as other farmers by subsidies. They have to make it on their own. So their attitude and their risk taking or their risk profiles are a little bit different. And of course our environment is a little bit different as well. And we had the impression that our stories that hadn't really been heard before. People were really interested and excited to hear what we had to say. That idea that the regulatory frameworks in Australia don't necessarily support landscape restoration projects, that they're all, they're framed around minimising the impact of development or activities on the environment, and they're not, we're all, we need significant reform there to try and support landscape scale restoration. And we were alone in that battle. There are many other countries, both developed Western democracies, if you like, and countries in the global south that are battling that same question. So, yeah, putting that forward and putting that on the table, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's something we need to address if we want to get this work done.
With the collective impact project, it was a nice example of a collective impact project to do with landscape scale restoration that could be used as a case study. So it was a really great opportunity to just drop that in as something that they might want to look at, and how the learnings and how it was done here in WA and how something like that can be replicated. So it was great to hear that there was a lot of interest even in this collective impact project that we've got. And then also the natural capital accounting work. It was quite interesting that I was on a panel talking about it, and it wasn't really well known, the actual on-ground data collection and monitoring and how that fits into natural capital accounting. So to be able to share those insights was really good as well, because, and similar, I guess, that there just hasn't been an opportunity to share that kind of work on that level before. So, yeah, quite a good space to shine the light on the work being done here, that peer-to-peer learning, whether it's farmer to farmer or on a global setting, organisationally, that peer-to-peer learning is just always going to be important and so good for that collaboration and change.
Everyone was very openly talking about regenerative agriculture as being like part of the solution, whereas it's like we get a sense here it's still a moving beast, but there's definitely a transition happening. We're getting more and more people asking about and talking about and being a bit more okay with the word regenerative. You want to talk to that a little bit, like
hearing those conversations at a global level and using the term regenerative agriculture, to me that says, well, it's not going away, that term, that industry is embracing it, and it's a way to help that momentum. And I think it's evolved where it's not, especially having the outcomes, it's outcomes based, it's not polarizing or divisive, which was sort of, I guess at the start people were unsure of what it meant, and there's no set definition and all that complex side of things. I think now people are understanding what it actually means and how it can help to come back and know that the work we're doing is relevant was really interesting. So with that, organisations like RegenWA and Mulloon and the grower groups and all that involved are really important for keeping it like realistic and like based on the context of each region, so that regenerative agriculture isn't taken out of context and used and then, there's risk of greenwashing and all that side of things, that groups like us are really important for validating the outcomes and making sure that it is relevant and context specific.
I think that focus on outcomes at the global level, that's how they're measuring the success of the agreements and the funding that are coming out of the convention. So there was a little bit of a challenge for us, I think, coming to terms with some of the discourse. So that, sustainable land management and land degradation neutrality, the language that they speak is a little bit different to ours. But yeah, this broader understanding now, I think, of regenerative agriculture, it's clearly there. And the focus on the outcomes that's that's really important, and understanding how that can work in all sorts of different contexts. So a lot of the different nations that are there have very few resources. They don't have access to any of the ag tech that we have here in Australia. These are subsistence farmers with very little, facing some pretty big challenges, and but occasionally seeing that they're stuck in a mindset that doesn't necessarily help them to take the opportunities that may come from regenerative agriculture or sustainable land management or land degradation neutrality initiatives. So, there's this sharing of case studies and what's working well in different countries was a really big feature of what went on. I think COP16 helped underscore the urgency of that kind of scale of work that we need to do. That's where Australia can make a real contribution. We're relatively small population-wise, but from a global level, if we can repair and restore the landscapes across the whole country, then we were making a major global contribution.
Well, I think that leaves us with a little bit of work to do in getting better at telling our stories and sort of sharing that information. And I know, like with Craig's family, they're across different landscapes within Western Australia, and I imagine they're not interested in necessarily having, big discussions about policy and strategy and all that sort of thing. It really is what is the on-ground, applications and how we, make that happen and support farmers to do that. Would that be right, Craig?
Absolutely, Ingrid. I think you've summarised that exceptionally well. And, pastoral property in the Pilbara of Western Australia, where one of my brothers is, compared to a beef grazing property in the southwest of WA, goes to show the scale of the landscape we're working with here in Western Australia for a start. But it absolutely has to be about local landscape outcomes and how you apply the principles. So the principles remain the same, but it's applying them to those very different and specific landscapes.
Right.
I think that's a challenge for us with our agricultural sector, not just here in WA, but across the country.
And determining what indicators are most appropriate or relevant that feed into different frameworks that can then feed up higher to help influence policy.
And look, that came up in one of the presentations that we sat in on, a project from Southern Africa, and that had been explored quite rigorously there, wanting to come up with a suite of indicators that can tell you whether you're moving toward those outcomes or not. But the work that they'd done there revealed that really had to be quite locality and project specific, because that would vary from groups of farmers to groups of farmers and from landscapes to landscapes. So having those broad principles, but being able to then ensure that there was room in those monitoring frameworks for very locally specific indicators. So I think the recognition that there's no one size fits all, that and that in a way that makes it challenging when you're trying to feed that up into global metrics, having a conversation at the nation state level, that's a challenge. But the importance of that, and how, if we want to see change on the ground and we want to build capacity of farmers everywhere to perceive their landscapes differently and to value their landscapes differently and then to manage differently, then you have to have that local that local piece. Yeah, you just start.
Were there some exciting and positive examples shared that you guys remember from COP?
I mean, getting a window onto some of the major initiatives that are happening in the Middle East was just mind-blowing. So 10 billion trees in Saudi Arabia, wow, 10 billion trees in the desert, and their commitment to that Saudi Green Initiative, and then the commitment more broadly to make that, plus 30, an additional 30 billion trees across the whole Middle East. You know, we talk about working at scale here and working at the catchment and landscape scale, but then to look at what they're planning there and what they know that they need to do. And similarly, in China, some of the massive initiative, the Green Wall initiative there, that is just it's overwhelming. So that you went from quite small scale things that were truly inspiring, and then these really large sort of landscape scale initiatives that were that you were seeing be rolled out. So that, I think, that was quite inspirational, really.
Carolyn stayed on a little bit longer than I did, and you were involved in a few more discussions and panels. Just out of interest, what they were like.
I had the privilege to be involved in a number of different panels. So one that kind of stood out was the Islamic Development Bank, and the opportunity to make a contribution to that panel, and the realisation that because in the Middle East and North African region, MENA as they call it, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of opportunity for investment, and so they have the opportunity to explore and fund a whole lot of different initiatives that can combat desertification, and trying to make the point in that panel that individual actions like developing drought-resilient plant varieties are really important, and we've done a lot of really good work on that here in Australia, but they're only part of the puzzle. So looking at our landscapes and how they function and seeing all those pieces come together was really important. So it was nice to have the opportunity to be involved in that panel. Similarly, the Nature Conservancy panel, talking about different success stories here in Australia and in India, and just the strength of small collaborative groups coming together and doing good work and then sharing that good work, and how that the results of those projects informed big global organisations like the World Bank, how they should consider investing, that helping guiding their decision making. That's a really challenging thing. The World Bank seems very sort of remote from action that happens on the ground here in Australia or on the subcontinent, and so connecting those two groups seemed really important. And then the panel with Common Land and Willem Fawada, when he launched the Fall Returns guidebook, that was quite remarkable, and how people embraced that need to go beyond just financial outcomes and productivity outcomes and biodiversity outcomes, but that human spiritual side of things was really important as well, and that really resonated with people, and having those open and frank discussions that as human beings, there's more to us than just outcomes that can be directly measured on a page. And then one final one that would be remiss of me not to mention, with a colleague, I would call him now, a fellow called Mitch McTuff, and some of the work that they did was around water management in refugee camps. Mm-hmm. And that kind of brought you back to earth, and the importance of beautiful functioning riparian areas and just water management overall in these camps where they're set up on marginal land. They're only ever envisaged to be there for a number of months, but some people spend 3 generations in these camps, and just how important water is to so many good things that can happen across agriculture and across human development as well. Challenging to hear those stories, but really important that they're told, I think.
Now that you've had, a little bit of time to digest things and think about it in the context of the work that you do, have either of you sort of started to develop your own vision for our nationalist future? Like, when you think about things into, 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30? Have you sort of come away and gone, oh, yeah, we might operate at this level, but my bigger vision would be this?
For me, it highlighted the power of policy and government and funding to help scale up.
So from Mulloon's perspective, we want to rehydrate Australia. Our mission is clear. We understand with 60% of our land mass under agriculture that we've got vast areas of degraded landscapes, and we've got the technology. We've got landscape rehydration infrastructure. We know how to fix the function of these landscapes. We've looked at tools in New South Wales of how to prioritise catchments for that kind of work. So we know that with funding and with policy change, we can see a pathway to a national program for restoration of landscape function across this country. We wouldn't need to spend anywhere near what they are in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We can empower our farmers to do a lot of that work themselves. The impact of that would be really powerful, I think, in terms of meeting some of the key challenges that we face around climate change, around biodiversity loss, and around productivity decline. So for our food and water security, it just seems so logical and achievable. But as Bonnie's mentioned, the policy settings and the funding, how you use bodies like National Cabinet to agree on the outcomes, get all the states and territories together to agree on the outcomes for our landscapes, how we bring First Nations knowledge into that. We've got such a long history of First Nations people caring for country being in Australia that can make a real contribution to that as well. Willingness at the national level to support that kind of thing, and then put in place, that's a lot of capacity building and support that's required there to make that a reality. And I think that some of what we've learned along the way in doing our work across Australia now is just the importance of that education and capacity building, and how critical that is to delivering outcomes, both sort of short-term outcomes, but delivering long-term outcomes. I think it's eminently achievable. It started as a bit of a pipe dream and how do we get there? But now I can see a pathway, and we've got amazing support networks in this country around, NRM Regions Australia, Landcare, all these different grower groups. We've got all this sort of social infrastructure, if you like, that could really help. Yeah.
And also tying to the natural capital accounting work, like if we can be able to put a value on natural capital, and with the nature repair market coming, and it's all slowly but surely coming, if we can help with that sort of, valuing the stuff that farmers aren't necessarily selling as a product, that can make a real difference.
I think so. We've got a great opportunity to accelerate landscape restoration and to realise a whole lot of co-benefits across the board. That's good for farmers, that's good for rural communities, that's good for First Nations people, that's good for us as a nation. It could really be a nation-building opportunity.
Well, I think that's really important. I think between the two of you, you've captured so much of your experience, but really I feel like it's just the tip of the iceberg, and I think there's probably more opportunities as the Collective Impact Project evolves, and the relationship between our two organisations sort of continues and builds to explore some of these topics, and how we might continue to sort of work together and mesh our work. But the messages really that came through to me were I think both of you talked about the urgency and that sense of urgency that came through, that action needs to happen, and that it really relies on people having the capacity to do that work and to be able to understand what they need to do and how to do it, and to be supported in that by our leadership and by the structures, not just at the community level, but also at that state level, and governments really having that long-term vision and showing that leadership. But I felt like what you talked about was achievable, and that really the human spirit and having hope helps to make it achievable and something that we can work towards and see a future for our country and for the globe. So thank you very much.